where we came from, how we got where we are, and where we're going with character development. Then Lieutenant Foreman is going to come on and talk a little bit about virtue ethics and the philosophy behind what we're doing with the character development program. Then I'll come back at the end and we'll wrap up with a little bit of a look at what we're trying to accomplish with recruiting and retention. So I'll start off with answering a crossover question here that was in the chat from Chaplain Hughes' session, and that is, pardon me, why does a commander have access to the lesson plans? And that's one that our original intent coming back through 2016, 2017, working on the 80-1 was that we were going to try to force the hand of every squadron in Civil Air Patrol to at least have a CDI on staff. And that has been met with considerable resistance. That's not been one that we've been able to get across the goal line, either practically on the squadron level or with the rest of National Headquarters staff. And so character development lessons, therefore, are able to be taught by commanders, chaplains, or CDIs. It's now going to be chaplain support specialists. And that is probably the way that that's going to be for a while. That said, coming back around at the end of our evening, we're going to talk a little bit about where we're headed with recruiting and retention, with the aim that we're going to grow our chaplain corps to the point where commanders either will want to be a CDI or a chaplain support specialist, and or they will see the value of having chaplain corps people in their squadron. So that said, let me see if I can successfully share my screen here. And we will take a look at this presentation, if I can get to it. Okay, Chaplain Minor, are you able to see that all right?
Yes, sir, that's great.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, very good. Okay, so values for living. Values for living has been part of the chaplain corps for a really long time, dating back to the 1950s. So the way that values for living had evolved, the flight time values for living had mushroomed to over 400 different lessons that people could choose from. And there was never, especially in the last 15 years, there was never really any consistent theme. You just kind of said, okay, I've got to do character development next month. And so you would go to this library of materials and say, what is it that I'm going to teach this next Monday or Tuesday night or whatever? And there was a wild variation of quality in the program. Some of the lesson materials that dated way back to the 1970s were just outlines, and there were some really good things there, but a lot of it was woefully outdated and not as relevant to today's cadets. We had lessons that had Cadet Betty and Cadet Fred, and you know, we don't have any Bettys and Freds running around in our squadrons today. So there were some presenting needs for an update in that regard. The facts analysis, I believe, is a really good tool, but it was getting tired and the cadets wanted more, they needed more. I got so much feedback that there were so many cadets that didn't look forward to character development night. And so it was something that needed to be updated. So there was also no training program for the instructors. Some of the instructors were professional educators, others were from all different walks of life. Some were very talented and gifted, some struggled, and so there was not anything beside the basic instructor course really to give guidance on how these lessons could be deployed, and so that was also a need. And there was no really clear path for the cadets to advance in the program or in the area of character or ethics. Other than, when I would do it with them, I would always try to pull out from them, okay, we did this facts analysis last. Did you have a chance during the course of the last month in a situation at school or some other place that you've been where you had to stop and say, okay, what's true right now and what am I assuming? And kind of take them through that. But other than that, there was no way to really advance through that program. So back in 2016, we had actually it was after the national conference, we sat down, Chaplain Hughes and Chaplain Ward, Paul Ward, and I sat down at dinner at the end of national conference and had this discussion about, can we please address the values for living and the character development program? Because if we don't, I'm afraid we're going to lose it. It is really in need of an upgrade. So we set out to do that. And at first it wasn't really clear how that was going to unfold. We figured at the time that it was going to kind of be an evolutionary process of revamping the character development program. But I believe that this all started with Chaplain Stu Boyd, who was on just a moment ago. And he is a graduate of the United States Air Force Academy. He went to an event there and through some conversations started realizing that, hey, we might be able to actually have a collaboration with what the Center for Character and Leadership Development at USAFA is doing with the Air Force Academy cadets, because they had spent a huge pile of money addressing character deficits at the Academy by building this whole staff and this state-of-the-art center to address character with the cadets. So as that started to become an option that we thought looked live and possible, there was a working group that we put together, and we went to the United States Air Force Academy and we spent a week there and worked with the staff there at the Center for Character and Leadership Development, saw what they were doing, had a chance to sit down and dialogue with each one of them, learned about the different aims and objectives that they had with their cadets and how it was working out for them. And they agreed to work with us on this program. So it became, rather than an evolutionary program of redeveloping our character development sessions, it became a revolutionary program change. And so this presentation is going to share some of the results of that effort. So at the Academy, they use a 4-phase program using facilitated instruction. And I'll circle back around to what facilitated instruction means in just a few moments. But they use this little acronym called PITO, and that stands for personal, interpersonal, team, and organization. So their phase 1, their first year cadets, everything's backwards. They're the first year cadets are the fourth tier or whatever, and so anyway. But anyway, they're first the freshmen at the Academy. Look at the personal aspect of character. Who am I? And then in their second year, during their character sessions, they look at the interpersonal. How should I relate to the people around me? Then in the third year, they look at how do I interact with and train others in a team setting. And then finally, the firsties, the people who are about to graduate in their fourth year, go through organization. How do I interact with my community? So as we looked at the way that they used PITO, we thought, you know, that we've got these phases in our cadet program as well, and this would really actually fit pretty well. So our phase 1 and 2 cadets are the ones who are the active participants in the character development sessions as we have them now. And so phase 1, which was actually the 2019 calendar year sessions, look at this whole aspect of who am I? So I have integrity, I have excellence, I have grit, I have vision for my life. All of these different topics were designed to relate to how I relate to myself as a virtuous person. And then the second year looks at the PI as interpersonal, looks at that relating to others, the interpersonal aspect of PITO, and that is inclusivity. How do I relate to other people and treat other people with respect as fellow human beings? How do I do teamwork well? How do I keep a confidence? So it's all these aspects of those interpersonal aspects of character and virtue as they're lived out in relationship with other people. So that's where we are right now. We're we're into the heroism lesson at this point in July, and then we will have. Let's see, I've got something's off here on my lesson timing. But anyway, we'll have the resilience lesson in September, and then we'll do justice, gratitude, and coaching to finish out the year. So the phase 3 cadets then are focused on that team aspect of PITO, personal interpersonal team. So now they become assistant facilitators. It gives them an opportunity now to stand up in front of the cadets and lead a team. They're the ones who are going to ask questions. They're going to participate as assistant character development facilitators of these lessons. And this is why it's really important to have them view that facilitation training video prior to presenting and participating in the lessons, because that aspect of them having some of those same skills that the chaplain CDI or commander is exercising are really important as they learn how to act as a leader of a team. And then the chaplain CDI commander monitors and records the training at the end. And then for the phase 4 cadet, we're still looking at what the program will evolve into as far as credit that the phase 3 cadets or any other aspects of the phase 3 experience that we need to add into the program. And then for the phase 4 cadets, we're probably leaning in the direction of submitting some kind of a character virtue related essay then that will be published in a journal, so that they'll be able to have that as something that is they can see that they've been published and they've got some kind of a character paper that they can then present as evidence of their published work as they look to go to university and so on. So what is facilitation, and why are we making a big deal out of using facilitation? The big difference is an instructor is a sage on the stage. There's somebody who's going to stand up and they're going to dump their storehouse of knowledge on the people who are sitting there as students, and those people take notes or whatever, and they try to absorb as best they can. And that's kind of the way that the lecture model works. But a facilitator is actually a guide by the side, as opposed to the sage on the stage. So a facilitator then is somebody who comes alongside and, almost like a coach, draws out the things that are already inside the participant and helps them to become helps them to become an active participant in the process of learning. And the ability to do that produces a much more transformational experience for the participant than simply sitting through a lecture. Now, the facts analysis had some of those components to it, and so that was one thing that was good about that. But these lessons that we have now are designed to take all of the best aspects of facilitation and pull them together into a lesson format that flows through that process. So we warm them up with some kind of an attention getter that sets the stage. Then we will often break into small groups and have the phase 3 cadets work, where the cadets are now interacting over the material. And one of the things that's nice about the small group setting is that cadets will often be reticent to share with a large group. They just, sometimes you might find that there are 2 or 3 cadets who always are the ones that raise their hand, and then you'll have other people who will want to sit back and be less active and not want to share as much. If you can get them in a group of 3 or 4 people where they're actually just having a conversation with each other, a cadet then can hear her own voice speaking talking about the issue that's at hand. And then when you get around to the point where the chaplain or character of, chaplain support specialist, I've got to get that drilled into my consciousness here, is leading the large group discussion, that cadet that would have been more reticent has already heard his or her own voice discussing the material and is much more likely now to jump into the large group and actually participate and help shape that discussion toward a good outcome, so that they grasp the material that's being presented. And then I guess I'll hold off on that one. then the activity is designed to do another aspect of grappling with the material, doing something hands-on or intellectually with the material that solidifies it. And then by the time you reach the end, the hope is that they have had enough interaction with the material that moving on beyond that night's meeting, they are more likely to actually internalize that and put it into practice so that it becomes behavior and they begin to practice the virtue that was being examined. So how can I learn to be an effective facilitator? Well, one of the big things is that we want you to take that facilitator training that's produced by CAP and the Air Force Academy CCLD staff. It's currently optional, but when the new 80-1 regulation hits the street, that will be, as opposed to the old basic instructor course, the new facilitator course is going to be required for chaplain support specialists in their prerequisites for becoming a CSS. And it's also going to be baked into the chaplain specialty track for professional development, so that as chaplains progress, probably, I don't know if it's going to be, I haven't looked at where it sits in there right now, but probably I would think that for that technician level of the specialty track for chaplains, that's going to be one of the items is, have you been through this facilitator training? And so,
Chaplain Sattgast?
Yes, sir.
As the editor of the 40-80, yes, it will be part of technician.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome, sir.
Right, so that training is currently in the learning management system. If you go to e-services, online learning, and learning management, it's not in the new access portal where a lot of the stuff is moved. It's the one item. If you go to the current learning management system and then scroll down to chaplain, the facilitator training is the one item that's still in there. So you can go through the whole thing in an evening. If you haven't been through it, I produced that with Tina Erzin, who was one of the instructors at the Air Force Academy, and she is absolutely one of the most profoundly gifted facilitators I've ever seen in my life. And it's very, very worth your while to go through those 7 or 8 lessons and make sure that you've absorbed that material before you do any more with character development. So, and it has just a little fill-in study guide link to the video, and there's a quiz at the end. So, and so each lesson, you probably preaching to the choir here, most of us are already aware of these because we probably are all presenting these, but the attention getter with usually a suggested media clip. This has been a little challenging going through the COVID time, as we have some squadrons that are trying to start meeting in person again and others that are still stuck online. And so we're trying to do the best that we can with having those attention getter resources available. And then understanding the concept behavior, facilitated discussion led by the phase 3 cadet, and then applying the concept in the large group and the activity in summary. So those lessons pretty consistently follow that format. So some things that we've heard over time. I don't like the lesson, and I can understand, and I realize especially that we got some feedback on the June lesson. The June lesson was a little edgy, and so I want to talk a little bit about why do we include edgy material in these lessons at times. And the reason is that these young people are encountering this stuff in their daily lives already. And what we are trying to do is give these young people an opportunity to, in a safe environment, a safe facilitated environment with an instructor that can walk alongside them, that they can grapple with some of these things, such as, how do I respectfully disagree with somebody else without compromising my own principles, my own morals, and so on? How do I do that? It's something that's a lost art in our culture right now, which is why, honestly, out of all lessons in this 24 lesson cycle, this lesson on respectful disagreement was the one that I have wanted in that lesson cycle from the very get-go. And because it's something that is our our undergirding core value that everything else rests, all our other core values rest on that value of respect. And so we wanted the cadets to have the opportunity to grapple with that. Now, you have some flexibility. You need to teach the subject matter in the general format presented. That doesn't limit your creativity though. You can adjust the times, you can pick a different activity, you can use a different media clip, you can use your own questions. If you didn't like the articles that were presented in the June lesson, you can find your own and use those. But it's important that we are all teaching the subject at the same time because it is progressing through a cycle that is intentional. And you need to use the Phase 3 cadets. If you don't have any Phase 3 cadets in your squadron, you can use Phase 4 cadets, or you can use the most senior cadets that you have. If you've got 2 basics and a cadet senior airman, use the cadet senior airman to facilitate the lesson, and that's fine. We don't have a CDI. Well, CDI approval process has been streamlined a lot. As was mentioned, the program from moral leadership officer to CDI to CSS has evolved over the years. One of the things that happened is the Board of Governors changed us from MLOs to CDIs and so on. When that originally happened, we had educational requirements. We had these 2 years of service in a church or synagogue or mosque kind of requirement, and those are not there at this point. So, and we're in the 80-1, the letter of recommendation is even going away because we would far rather see the commander write something personally in that application that says Joe Jones is an outstanding member and has great influence on the cadets and will be a monumentally good CDI. That's what we're looking for. Anybody can get their neighbor to write them a letter. So we've streamlined the process. So the big thing we want to ask squadrons is please find someone, make it a priority in your wing and your squadron to make sure that we have somebody who is qualified to teach these lessons in the squadron. We don't have media support. Well, it's really pretty simple. You need a computer and some kind of a TV screen, laptop to do that, and that's just kind of where we are with those. And you know what? If you run into technological problems, tell a story. It's fine if you do want to do that for the attention getter at the beginning. So those are the let's see. Oh yes. So outcomes. The Air Force Academy moved to this model several years ago, and so the question is, what came of that? Honor violation incidents are down. Sexual harassment incidents are down. Cadet feedback at the Academy has been positive. And to be honest with you, here in Civil Air Patrol, by and large, feedback from instructors, commanders, and cadets has been positive. I've had so many good reports about cadets who now look forward to character development night, about cadets coming up to me and saying, I really am enjoying the program. This has been so good. And so I'm really grateful for that feedback. Lack of character is increasingly in the news, and we need help. We need to help CAP cadets develop a strong ethical foundation. So I think in kind of wrapping up this little session, which is fairly short, I want to tell you a story about back in 2005, we held a glider camp here in Oregon, down in Malino, Oregon. And it took us a year to plan for the thing. We had a whole air ops side, and then we had a cadet ops side, and I actually headed up the cadet ops side and ran the cadet ops for that event. So one of the nights, and it was a very successful event, the cadets all got to fly in a glider and fly in a powered plane and had all kinds of wonderful activities. One night we had the Portland astronomers come out, and they set up their big, like 12-foot tall amateur telescopes, and the cadets got to look at deep space objects and things that you don't usually get to see, which was pretty cool. So the cadets headed off to their tents, and I'm standing out there talking to these guys from the Portland astronomers as they're taking their telescopes down and packing them up. And this fellow turns to me and he says, you know, he said, I'm a Tektronix security guard out in Beaverton. And he said, we've got these housing projects behind us, and I deal with juvenile delinquents and riffraff all day long. And I had completely lost hope that there was any future for our world. He paused. And then he said, until tonight. Because he met our cadets, and I know you know our cadets because you work with them, and I know you know how special they are. And everywhere we go, people are impressed by our cadets. And there's a reason, because Civil Air Patrol does a great job at bringing customs and courtesies and leadership training into their lives. I think that we do some of the best job at leadership training that any organization does with young people. But if we don't somehow manage to give those cadets an ethical foundation, if we don't somehow manage to impart to them virtues that give them a moral compass so that their leadership is ethical and sound and virtuous leadership, we've lost the war. Because these young people are our world leaders coming right behind us. 10, 15 years from now, these kids that we're teaching in, in character development sessions are going to be starting to come into leadership positions in finance, government, military, entertainment, all kinds of different areas of our world and our country. And it's so much a privilege that we have right now to have this opportunity to grapple with some of these very difficult issues that they're facing in their lives in a safe environment with a facilitator who's trained and cares and is able to process those things with those cadets so that they walk away from that evening with their virtue built just a little bit more deeply into their hearts and their behavior changed so that they walk it out a little bit better the next day. And then they come back the next month and they get it honed a little bit more. So thank you for everything that you do with this character development program. I love our cadets. I love you and what you do with our cadets. And this is some of the most important work that you'll ever do in your life. It's some of the most important one of the most important things that you can ever do to impact the world right now is to impart the things into the lives of these kids that will give them those virtues and that ethical framework. So I believe that that is pretty much what we have here. Thank you for your investment in the future leaders of our world. So I am open to questions.
Sir, I was wondering if we might move on to the next segment and then save all the questions once our students here see the big philosophy behind it. That may help us craft our questions. Is that okay?
Sounds wonderful to me. Let Lieutenant Foreman take it away.
Lieutenant Foreman, are you on, sir?
I am. Can you hear me, sir?
Loud and clear.
And is the picture coming through?
Perfect. Thank you.
I've got one more check here. I'm going to try to share the share the PowerPoint, and will you please tell me if that is coming through?
Perfect. Thank you.
Oh, wonderful. Okay. So good evening, everybody. My name is Wes Foreman. I'm a character development instructor in the Oregon wing at Columbia Composite Squadron in Portland, and I am part of the team that works with Chaplain Sattgast to produce the character development lessons. Chaplain Miner asked me to speak to you tonight about virtue ethics and the role of virtue ethics in the character development program. So we have three goals for this briefing. The first one is explain what virtue ethics is and how it differs from other kinds of ethical reasoning. The second is to explain what we mean by virtue. What is this virtue and virtue ethics? And last, we're going to try to explain how CAP's character development lessons help cultivate virtues in our cadets and possibly even in our senior members or our facilitators. Before we get into the first section on three kinds of ethical thinking, a couple of caveats. For many of you, this may be review. I suspect that some of you saw Chaplain Matthews' excellent presentation on virtue ethics and transformational leadership. Maybe some of you encountered this in your formal education. And you will notice that these descriptions of the different kinds of ethical inquiry are simplified. I've simplified them so that they're accessible to somebody who's never heard about this before. So I apologize in advance if I have presented your preferred mode of ethical inquiry in a manner that you think is too simplistic. That said, none of these three approaches is foolish. Each one of them has something to contribute to our own process of ethical reasoning. Each one has very bright and well-intentioned advocates. If we push on them too hard, we can make them mutually exclusive. That's not what we're trying to do today. Rather than forcing you to choose between the approaches, what I would like to do is encourage you to think about how each one of them can contribute to your own ethical reasoning. So let's take a look at these three kinds of ethical reasoning. The three kinds of ethical reasoning, well, arguably there are more than three, but let's start with three, are deontology, which is characterized by a focus on rules, consequentialism, which is characterized by a focus on outcomes, and virtue ethics, which is characterized by a focus on moral agents and their qualities. So we'll start with deontology. So according to deontologists, right actions are those which follow the rules, be they norms or commands, regardless of the outcome of following that rule or the disposition of the individual moral agent. For a deontologist, ethical reflection consists in identifying and applying the right set of rules. Great examples of deontological thinking, Moses handing on the Decalogue. These are divine commands, and you should follow them because I am the Lord your God. We find a similar instruction in Koheleth, who tells us the last word when all is heard, fear God and keep his commandments. This is everything for man, or this applies to all humanity. Jesus says to his disciples, if you love me, keep my commandments. The person on the right, if you don't recognize him, is Immanuel Kant, who very famously gave us a categorical imperative, a universal moral rule that he thought derived not from revelation, but from reason. In CAP, we all agree to follow rules and regulations. And in that sense, we're all engaged in deontological reasoning. In fact, we even have a part of Civil Air Patrol with special competence in deontological reasoning. I'm talking about the inspectors general. They do a great job of ensuring compliance and handling complaints having to do with violations of the rules. So, summary, deontology asks the question, which rules should determine my actions? The second form of ethical inquiry that we're going to talk about today is consequentialism. Consequentialism is focused primarily on outcomes. Right actions and right rules are those that lead to positive or favorable outcomes. Now, deontologists and consequentialists will agree on some rules and actions, but they'll usually agree for different reasons. Deontologists will argue that the rules are divinely inspired or objectively true. Consequentialists tend to defend rules that have generally produced favorable outcomes. For the consequentialist, ethical reflection consists in determining which outcome is most positive and identifying the actions and the rules that will generally lead to those outcomes. Some examples of consequentialist thinking, well, colloquially, you've heard the expression, the ends justify the means. That's probably the most exaggerated form of consequentialism, but it's not, but it is consequentialism. Epicurus, the famous philosopher of hedonism, thought that any action, the best action was one that maximized pleasure and minimized pain. Interestingly, I have Moses here again, and this is Moses in Deuteronomy, when he encourages the children of Israel to follow the law before entering the land. He does it not because I'm the Lord your God, but because I've set before you life and death, blessings and curses. Choose life so that you and your children may live. The reason that you should follow this law is because it will lead to a blessing for you. The consequences are good. The person on the right, John Stuart Mill, arguably the most famous consequentialist and the father of utilitarianism, taught that right actions and right rules are those that accomplish the greatest good for the greatest number of people. In CAP, we all are concerned with outcomes. We have congressionally chartered missions that we want to prosecute successfully, and we should favor rules and actions that help us achieve our goals. In personal opinion, I think that our unit commanders have a special competence in consequentialist thinking because once they've established what the rules are, they have to make decisions about which course of action to follow based on what's going to help them accomplish the mission most effectively. So summary question for consequentialism, which positive outcomes should motivate my choices? Now let's take a look at virtue ethics. Virtue ethics is like deontology and consequentialism in some ways. Like the deontologists, virtue ethics will accept that there may be objective rules, either determined by reason or given by divine revelation. Like consequentialists, virtue ethics are concerned with a particular outcome. In the tradition, this is called eudaimonia. It's a Greek word that's somewhat difficult to translate. Often you see it translated as happiness. Human flourishing is probably better. The point of making ethical choices for the virtue ethicist is to improve human flourishing. Well, how's it different? Because virtue ethics focuses on the moral agent, It's less concerned with questions like which is the good choice or which is the best outcome. Instead, ethical reflection in virtue ethics consists of asking, what are the qualities of a good person? And once I understand those qualities, how can I become a good person? Virtue ethicists have observed that good people do tend to have certain qualities. And if we can identify, describe, and imitate those qualities, then we ourselves can become virtuous people, perhaps even happy people. Whereas deontologists and consequentialists enjoy untangling exceptionally complex ethical problems. Perhaps you've heard of the prisoner's dilemma or the trolley problem, various life draft scenarios. The bread and butter of virtue ethicists is often the general or the mundane, because virtues are not one-off moral choices or exceptional moral acts. Instead, virtues are habits, tendencies. We'll get to the definition in just a moment. Famous examples of virtue ethicists, well, the dominant figure in the early tradition is Aristotle, particularly Aristotle of the Nicomachean Ethics, and he's on the left. That's from Raphael's School of Athens. The person on the right is Thomas Aquinas, one of the great medieval proponents of virtue ethics. You can see examples of virtue ethical arguments in our scriptures as well. Christ, when he's giving instructions in the Beatitudes, describes the kind of person that you should be. Right? You should be poor in spirit. You should be pure of heart. You should be a peacemaker. Likewise, he'll sometimes offer comparison descriptions of qualities. You should be as discerning as serpents and as innocent or unsimple or uncomplicated as doves. Paul likewise says, be imitators of me as I am of Christ. And Paul is the source of our great listing of the three theological virtues, faith, hope, and charity. So the summary question for virtue ethics, what kind of person should I be? What are the qualities of a good person and how can I become that good person? All right, so to review, three kinds of ethical reasoning. Deontology is primarily focused on rules and asks, which rules should govern my actions? Consequentialism is focused primarily on outcomes and says, which outcomes should motivate my choices? Virtue ethics is focused primarily on moral agents and asks, what kind of person should I be? I'm sure you see why this is so germane to a character development program in Civil Air Patrol. So let's move on to our second question. What is virtue? And this, I apologize for a complicated definition, but we're going to break it down. Very simply, virtue is our common translation of the Greek word arete, which means excellence. But for our purposes, I would like you to think of virtue as the perfection of a proper faculty. And I'm going to break down the complicated words there. We'll start with faculty, then we'll go to proper, and then we'll talk about what it means to have a faculty perfected. So first, very simply, a faculty is the ability to carry out some operation, to do something. Examples of faculties include deriving nutrition from food, seeing, moving, thinking, arguing. All of these faculties allow us to carry out some operation, although we may carry out that operation more or less well, more or less proficiently, with more or less internal resistance. Nevertheless, the idea is the same. A faculty is the ability to carry out some operation. Well, what's a proper faculty? So a proper faculty is the ability to carry out an operation that achieves one's purpose. So this is easier to understand if we get some examples. A knife. The proper faculty of a knife is its ability to cut. Now that knife can be very shiny, it can be very elegant, it might be especially well balanced, but if it doesn't cut well, it's not a very good knife. Likewise, a bucket can be, you can make a bucket out of gold, but if the bucket doesn't hold liquids, it's not a very good bucket. In order to be a good bucket, to be a bucket with the virtue of a bucket, it needs to be able to hold water. Well, what's the proper human faculty? Now, here our religious traditions give many different answers, and part of the opportunity and the challenge of working in an ecumenical or in a religious setting, a pluralistic setting like ours, is engaging those different answers. For our purposes, we have easy common ground in the core values. The core values provide our collective answer to this question. We expect all of our members to demonstrate integrity, volunteer service, excellence, and respect. What are people for? People are for embodying the core values. At least within the context of Civil Air Patrol. I'm sure that outside of a Civil Air Patrol setting, many of you will have slightly different or perhaps more developed answers. So let's talk about perfection of a faculty. Sometimes we think that perfection means without error. In this context, when we're talking about faculties, perfection describes the ability of a faculty to carry out its operation well, promptly, and with little resistance. The example I like to use here is something I say to my kids. We joke that cats are nature's perfect killing machines. And any of you who has cared for a cat has noticed that they have a remarkable faculty for killing small animals. Chaplain Sattgast pointed out to me that every year, millions of mice and billions of birds perish under the paws of house cats. And it's true. Cats carry out the operation of killing small animals with remarkable ease and efficiency. And because of that, we can say cats are perfect killing machines, at least for small animals. Now, to count as a perfection, the quality should be entrenched. It should be firm. Aquinas prefers the expression difficult to change. It should endure over time. Catching one mouse does not make Tommy the Tomcat a perfect killing machine. However, as Tommy demonstrates over time that he's an effective mouser, we can say that he is perfecting that faculty. And Tommy admittedly may not remain a good mouser forever, but it would take something drastic, like the loss of his vision, the loss of a limb, or even death, to radically impair his faculty for catching mice. So perfection describes the ability of a faculty to carry out its operation well, promptly, and with little resistance. Now, some of you may say, hey, wait, and sorry for the $5 word excursus. Let's call it an aside instead, an aside on habit. Many of you may know that some of our collective traditions have used the word habit to describe the virtues, and Aquinas and Aristotle in particular. Why didn't we use habit in this talk? There is a word. Please bear with me while there is a reason, and please bear with me while I try to explain it. Our faculties have long been divided into several groups, usually three. This division goes back to classical antiquity and appears in many of our religious traditions in the medieval period. The vegetative faculties include things like deriving nutrition, growing, reproducing, and these are characteristic of plants. The sensitive faculties include powers of sense perception and instinct, and they're characteristic of animals. There's a third class, the rational faculties, which are powers unique to human beings, and these are the powers of intellect and will. Now, human virtue, as opposed to a simple excellence of a lower faculty, must perfect and preserve those proper human faculties, those faculties which are distinctive to human beings. And those faculties include intellect and will. So perhaps now you can see where this is going. Modern psychology and popular professional development and self-development books tend to present habits as something automatic. As if once you develop a habit, you do something without thinking and maybe without even choosing to do it. That is distinctly not what we mean by virtue. Every exercise of virtue should be a deliberate choice. Granted, a deliberate choice that's made easily and without resistance, but a deliberate choice that's made with free intention to choose and with full knowledge of what you're choosing. So the reason I avoided habit in this talk, it might have made the definition easier, but the reason I avoided it is because I want you to understand, please, that habits always involve understanding and choice. They are not automatic. Virtues make it easier to know the good and to choose it, but they do not, as it were, choose the good for us. Okay, let's talk about third part of the, a review of the second topic. What is virtue? Virtue is the perfection of a proper faculty. And in CAP, virtue is the ready, easy, and reliable ability to choose to live according to the core values. So let's take a look at question number 3. How do we cultivate virtue? I'm going to suggest to you that there are 3 ways to perfect a faculty. Now, these aren't necessarily in order. And I'll admit that one of the challenges with the lessons is it would be nice if we could break these up into discrete steps. First you do 1, then you do part 2, then you do part 3. That's simply not the way most perfection of a faculty comes. Instead, you may start with 1 and then get to 2, then go back to 1, and then go to 3 and go back to 1. and then go to 2 and jump to 3. You'll do, there are modalities to which you return throughout the course of your training. So I've called these example and imitation, recognition and theory, and challenge. So let's take a look at what we mean. I'm going to do this by an analogy to playing the piano. If you're going to learn to play the piano, the first step usually involves seeing and hearing someone else play the piano. You practice by imitation. And if you're especially committed to learning to play the piano, you're going to look around for more opportunities to practice. You'll carve out time in your day. The good teacher may even help get you on a schedule so that you know how much time you should be practicing every day and when the good times to practice are. A really excellent piano teacher will make sure you have every opportunity to practice and give you all the resources you need to do it. A second modality involves recognition and theory. Through exposure to good examples and through your own practice of imitation, you will start to recognize what good piano playing sounds like. And eventually, you may even complement your experience with some formal theory. That could be learning how to read music. It could be studying harmony or proportion. The combination of recognition and theory will help you understand musicality, and it will make it easier for you to play and easier for you to play well. So as your recognition and theory grow, your ability to imitate good music will increase. And lastly, challenge. As you improve as a pianist, you will want to start challenging yourself. Some of these challenges are pretty easy. You may say at first, can I play this piece at a different tempo? Can I play this piece from memory? They may get more challenging as your theoretical skills improve, and you say, could I transpose this piece to a different key? And maybe eventually you'll start to look for a more challenging composition. By the way, that picture on the right, that's the face of Rachmaninoff pasted on to a strongman, courtesy of an NPR article. Rachmaninoff, for those of you who don't know, is famous for exceptionally challenging piano compositions. So you perfect the faculty by engaging all of these modalities. We usually begin with example and imitation, but then you complement that with recognition and theory, and eventually challenge yourself. And by doing all of these things together and repeatedly, you develop the ability to play the piano not just competently, but readily and easily. And the same thing works with perfecting the faculty of virtue. You start with example and imitation. Most moral education begins with stories or with narratives. Stories give us the examples of the virtues that we're trying to teach. And so you'll notice that many of our lessons start by offering a model for imitation, or sometimes we encourage the cadets to share their own stories and their own models. They may already have some understanding of the virtue in question, and by giving them a chance to talk, we can find out what their models are. As we move forward in the lesson, we start to engage in recognition and theory. We ask them to practice recognizing examples of the virtue in question and to build their theoretical understanding through our discussions by attempting to describe and to explain the target behavior. The questions in the lessons, like a Socratic midwife, are supposed to help cadets refine their theoretical knowledge. Chaplain Sattgast gave the contrast between the sage on the stage and the guide by the side. A facilitator, using the questions in the lesson, should be taking the role of the guide on the side. We're posing questions that help the cadets do work on their own thoughts, their own understanding of the concepts. And so we'll ask questions like, what's the opposite of this behavior? What rules govern this behavior? Oh, watch out, there we go, being deontologist. What opportunities do I have to practice this behavior? What are some of the consequences that come from practicing this behavior? There's our nod to the consequentialist. How does this behavior relate to other virtues and to the core values generally? The best questions in this recognition and theory modality don't have easy answers. They're supposed to be discussion prompts and not quiz questions. By posing the questions and getting ourselves out of the way, we let the cadets themselves practice ethical reasoning. This is hands-on character development. And it's by practicing that they'll learn to do it on their own. So challenge. Some of our discussion questions and activities attempt to push the cadets, either in understanding the target behavior and the principles that govern it, or practicing the desired behavior. We ask ourselves when we're writing the lessons, what kind of stress can we place on our cadets and our participants, something like the metronome or playing from memory, that will make the normal exercise or the normal application or understanding of this virtue that will make the normal exercise easier. If you can do it when you're stressed, if you can do it when it's challenging, it should be easier or lighter to do it when things are not quite so fraught. Now, sometimes those challenges actually resemble the complicated ethical dilemmas so beloved of deontologists and consequentialists. We understand that some of our challenges are very challenging and, frankly, perhaps too challenging. We trust you facilitators, chaplains and CDIs and squadron commanders to make good prudential judgments about the right level of difficulty for your cadets. So to answer a question from Captain Parsons earlier in the chat, yes, please do tailor the monthly lesson to the needs and to the abilities of your squadron. We are counting on you. This is subsidiary in practice. We're counting on you at the local level to make this lesson work for your cadets. And you have been authorized to do this job. That means we trust you to do it. So please do moderate the level of challenge to make it appropriate for your cadets. Ideally, the challenges are also fun and memorable. My experience facilitating the lessons has been that the challenges are often the things that the cadets are discussing after the meeting, and that's great. I would love to know that my cadets are going home and telling their parents, we had a really interesting character development discussion tonight, and I'm just not sure what I think about this. What do you think, Mom? What do you think, Dad? And that's a great gift to our cadets, and it's a great gift to our cadet parents if we can pull it off. So let me advance the slide here. To review, we discussed 3 approaches to ethics: deontology, which is focused on the rules governing our actions; consequentialism, which is focused on the outcomes of those actions; and virtue ethics, which focuses on agents or actors and seeks human flourishing through the cultivation of ethical qualities, which we call virtues. We also proposed a definition of virtue. Virtue is the perfection of a proper faculty. And in Civil Air Patrol, that means the ability to choose readily, easily, without internal resistance, to live according to the core values. And lastly, we explored the ways in which CAP's character development lessons aim to help cultivate virtue, help perfect those moral faculties. We talked in particular about 3 modalities: example and imitation, recognition and theory, and challenge. So thank you very much for the opportunity to share this information with you today. I hope that it's been useful to all of you in the field. I hope that the monthly lessons are helpful. I'd also like to say thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to participate in this program. Chaplain Sattgast spoke very eloquently about the effect that we think this program is having on our cadets and on the world. It is a tremendous privilege to be able to share in this work. So thank you very much. I will stop sharing here. Let's see if I can do this, and turn off my mic and hand it back to you, Chaplain Miner.
Well, thank you very much to both of you. And I think that our students get to see that we are, not only did we give them the what are we doing, but we took time to learn the theory behind why we're doing what we're doing. And that idea of giving them the recognition and the theory behind the whole program itself. So I'll turn it over to our question monitors. Chaplain Williams, anything in Moodle that you'd like to add out, talk about, sir?
I need to unmute. Seeing that we are combining the 2 sessions for questions, I would again like to defer to begin with to Jessica, and then fill in what we can, because I again can get these questions to Charlie and have him answer for us offline.
Very good. Cap Parsons, anything in the chat line that you'd like to bring out, please?
Well, one of the questions from I'm going to go ahead and go in order. One of the big questions that came up from new character development was the idea of the video and how to present the video, where to find it, and how to present it if the online portion just isn't providing the ability to share a video.
Okay. One of the things that we've run into as a little bit of a legal hurdle is as we provide certain clips under fair use copyright law, in order for us to maintain our responsibility to the legal side of the Civil Air Patrol Corporation, we have to make sure that we follow those copyright rules. And one of those rules is that only people who are authorized instructors can have access to those video files. So that's why a lot of the videos that we've taken from, say a 6-minute, 5-minute clip from a 2-hour movie have wound up in the Access LMS, Learning Management System, because we can't just post them out there on the general website and have anybody download them, because we would be in violation of copyright law if we did that. Some of the video files, such as last year, the Mount Everest climb, we got explicit permission from the person who produced that video to be able to share it. And so when we can manage that, then we will just put it up there on the cadet library where it's easy and available to download. Again, the COVID situation has produced some unique challenges for us, and we will do the best we can to make sure that we have resources that are usable. But if you don't have the ability to show a video at all in the context of where your meeting is, especially if you're getting back together and your squadron meeting is outdoors, for instance, because of COVID, you might do just as well, for instance, in the July lesson, to just tell the story of Clarence Sasser, Medal of Honor winner, or find another appropriate story to tell, or tell a story that illustrates something from your own life or another person that you know. I don't know if that answers the question well, but we're working to make sure that the video resources are available as well as we can. And if you have some suggestions on what might work better for you, be sure and let us know in the chat or in the Moodle, and we'll be grateful for that feedback.
Wonderful. Thank you, sir. Another question from the same course. Many squadrons lack phase 3 and phase 4 cadets. Some only have phase 1 cadets. In that case, one member typically has the highest ranking phase 1 cadet step into some of those leadership roles, though with mixed results. Are there better or more standardized ways to modify these lessons for such squadrons?
If you're in that kind of situation and you just don't have resources at all, you could lead the discussion yourself for the small groups. I would assume that it's probably a smaller squadron if that's the case. So, there's flexibility. Please do the best that you can so that you get the best outcome. Is that consequentialism?
All right, and then we have another question. Is it a problem to use senior members for group discussions if there's a lack of cadet leadership or cadet participation?
I don't know if there's an official answer to that, but I'd be fine with it. Do what works the best for you. Use the cadets if you have them. Lieutenant Foreman, do you have a comment on that?
Yeah, may I chime in here, please? I love getting the senior members involved in character development. Yes. I think it's so helpful for the cadets to see senior members actively engaged in these questions and working on understanding and developing the same behaviors that they're working on. And often, there will be a moment in one of the lessons where you can see a senior member having an aha moment. And the experience of watching a senior member, a cadet's experience of watching a senior member say, wow, this is really valuable to me, that's invaluable. It's so helpful for me as a facilitator. So by all means, please do involve your senior members. The risk, and obviously there are some risks. One of the risks is that some senior members may talk over the cadets. And that's something that you have to address with your senior members privately. Please do it outside of the lesson. And second, you want to make sure that cadets are able to speak to each other. So when our cadets are in small groups, I am trying to hide the fact that I'm listening. I'll walk around the room. We have a large squadron, and so we'll have several groups. I'll try to hide the fact that I'm listening. because if I'm listening, they're less likely to share each other's experiences, share their honest experiences with each other. On the other hand, if I'm not right there looking over their shoulders in small groups, then they'll get going. And once they get going, then usually the conversation takes off. So yes, having senior members involved in your lessons is great. Just make sure that they don't trample over the cadets and that they don't compromise the value of the small group experience. I hope that answers your question.
Let's face it, it's kind of open secret that we are all in the process of honing our personal virtues through these lessons. It's not just the cadets that benefit from them, hopefully.
All right, we have a couple more questions. For wing CDIs, they have asked, what is the minimum we can do to adhere to the lesson plan, but still tailor it to our squadron?
All right, so you are allowed to follow the format, but use your own examples. Generally, I would say I would try to stick pretty closely to the questions in the small group and large group discussions, but you're also free to tailor an activity that's more appropriate to your cadets. You're the one who knows the situation that your cadets are in your part of the country, in your community, whether it's an urban community or a rural community, whether you've got almost all homeschool families, or if it's an urban squadron that has almost no homeschool students. You have a wide variety of different situations, and so tailor it as best you can so that it gets the job done, especially with the attention getter and the activity.
Let me just quickly jump in.
And just Chaplain Boyd is one of our trio of people on the lesson development team.
Part of the team. The objective that the Air Force Academy found successful was to get the cadets to talk. It was not to have anybody tell them what to understand or what, and so, you know, and so I think the facilitator guide that was created by Chaplain Sattgast and Tina is critical to watch. Now, however the squadron decides to deal with a CSS or CDI lesson once a month, the more talk you can get out of the cadets, the more successful your lesson is going to be. Tina had one suggestion. I don't know if, I think it's in the facilitator lesson, and I've used it actually, is I have a cricket sound on my cell phone. So I do a lot of facilitating, such with the COVID process up here in Utah. And so when people won't talk, I turn on the cricket. And they sit there and listen to the cricket for a while, and then they decide, no, I guess I've got something to say. So to speak to that, whatever works to get the cadets talking about the objective of the lesson, I believe, and I think we all believe, is the outcome we desire.
Thank you, Chaplain Boyd.
All right, more questions coming into the chat. Character development for seniors. Will there be content and guidelines appropriate for them in the future?
Yes, there is actually a character development program for seniors that is, it is 80, what is it, 80 pamphlet 80 something that is actually already approved and in the CAP publications. That is,
Sir, it's
80-3.
80-3, and we'll talk about it next week.
okay, and they'll talk about it next week.
Looking forward to that. And then is it possible to have a character development night for the whole squadron once a quarter for cadets and for senior members together combined?
Oh, I think that's a marvelous idea.
And then
being able to get everybody together and to really interact over things, as long as the senior members don't shut the cadets out in the process, so that everybody is actually able to grapple with these things. The reason that we address this whole issue of senior character development is that do seniors not need character development too? My goodness. You know, we have the vast majority of Inspector General complaints and investigations revolve around core values violations. So certainly we all have need of opportunity to hone our virtues. And these lessons, I think, are as appropriate for students as they are for anybody.
That's a good question.
All right. And then we have another question about any ideas for promoting talking during the virtual character development sessions. Sometimes the cadets just don't want to pop in and be the first ones to speak.
Yes. Go to the capnhq.gov and go to the learning management system to online learning and go back through that character development facilitator training, because Tina very specifically covers that in the training. And so I would recommend that you go back there and pull those lessons up and watch through them once a year or once every 6 months. We all can grow in our ability to facilitate well.
Great, thank you. And then we just have one question so far for virtue ethics. How does virtue ethics address Aristotle's golden mean, which is addressed in Chapter 3 of Learn to Lead for our cadets in objection to trait theory? There it is acknowledged that there can be too much of a good thing and no single trait can be deemed completely correct or incorrect, and virtue is therefore in the middle ground between two extremes. Kind of a theological question there.
Thank you. Well, I'll get there. I responded to that one in the chat, and I'm glad we get to talk about it. So the golden mean suggests it's an observation by Aristotle, and Aristotle's observations are often correct and worth paying attention to. Aristotle observes that moral virtues tend to be means between extremes, one extreme of excess and one extreme of deficiency. So when we're looking for a moral virtue, we tend to find it between those two poles. For example, courage. Courage is not the same thing as having no fear. That's recklessness. And courage is also not the same thing as cowering in fear, right? Courage as a virtue has to be somewhere between those two extremes. And many of the cardinal virtues recognized and described by Aristotle follow that rule. We do sometimes bring it out in the lesson. I admit I did several times put in specifically the language, moral virtues tend to be a mean between two extremes, one of excess, one of deficiency. And that's me being a little bit too academic, and Chaplain Sattgast wisely helps me cut those cut those lines out to keep the lessons accessible. Notably, you mentioned a theological question. Aquinas notes about the golden mean that the theological virtues do not follow that rule. Faith, hope, and charity are not means between extremes, but instead actually tend towards excess. They're also different from the cardinal virtues, or the secular virtues, in that we don't tend to acquire those by habit or by practice or by repetition. Instead, the theological virtues are infused by grace. Now, that's a separate theological conversation. I realize these are the people in CAP who would love to talk to me about that, but I hope that at least starts to answer the question. We are aware of the golden mean. It is sometimes discussed in our lessons. I think the last time I referred to it specifically was in the lesson on humor, where we talked about the appropriate humor being eutropelia in Aristotle, being a mean between the extremes of boorishness and frivolity. So it does come up, and it can be very helpful for understanding the virtue in question. Thank you for the question.
Great. It's always nice when we can include some of the stuff from Learn to Lead in the character development lessons. I feel like it really helps the cadets. That's all that we have from the Zoom so far. I'll go ahead and keep an eye on that. Chaplain Williams, back to you.
Well, I do like this one that just popped up, relates virtue ethics with ministry of presence. That's going to be fun. What we're going to want to do is get a reading from Tim. It is now 3 minutes after the hour, and Charlie has a recruiting retention that he's going to be working with.
And
was
I
wondering
will
if
say
we
that
should-
I'm not going to be lengthy on that one for everybody's benefit. It's going to be a briefing about where we are and where we're headed, but it will not be time consuming.
I'm figuring you're going to take at least 15 minutes from what we talked earlier today.
About, yes, but probably no more.
So I would think that I would like to submit the questions to both Lieutenant Foreman and our good chaplain Sattgast for written answers, if that would be acceptable, and move on to the next session. Is that acceptable with you, sir?
That's great. Chaplain Sattgast, if you want to start now, I suspect everybody would like to get out early again if we could.
Let's do that. Okay, so